Welcome back. Dr. Bongo Adi is joining me right now. He's a senior lecturer at Lagos Business School, former assistant professor, American University of Nigeria, Yola. Dr. Adi, welcome to the program. Quite a while.
Yes, Nancy, thank you for having me.
Welcome to the program. It's been a while. I hope you've been staying safe. We've not spoken.
Oh,
Oh,
yes,
I haven't seen you in a while.
that's true. We are safe. We are grateful that we're still alive.
Yeah. Let's get started. When you saw those numbers that were released by the NBS just a few weeks now, it's not just a few weeks ago, about the unemployment data. Unemployment rate in Nigeria stands at 33.3% amid a myriad of many economic doom numbers that we have, amid a pandemic also. How did you feel and what's your assessment of it?
Well, I wasn't surprised, because we've been observing the indicators for the period. So starting from when we were declared the poverty capital of the world. So you would know what the correlates, the very strong correlates to poverty are. So one of them, of course, is unemployment, all right? But again, unemployment figures, they don't tell the entire story. If you consider that currently, in fact, from 2015 or 2014, when our economy started to lose momentum and then went into recession in 2016. And again, as the economy was about to recover, COVID-19 struck late 2019. And then last year was just one that everybody would love to forget. So when you put all those things into perspective, you will notice that Nigeria's economy has become what economists call stagnation. So you have stagnant growth, and then you have high inflation. Okay, so we need to look at what causes all of this. I mean, from the direct causative factors, because there are some other indirect factors, and then some of those environmental context that we have nothing to do with, whether we like it or not. They are what they are. So call them covariant forces. So if you look at the direct cause of this stagflated economy, so what you observe is first, stagflation is from an economic point of view, it's in an unnatural situation because you have a combination of stagnant growth, high unemployment, and high inflation. And that is exactly where we are. So why is it an unnatural situation? Because inflation is not supposed to occur in a weak economy, in a slow-growing economy. You're not supposed to have inflation, right? In a normal market economy, slow growth prevents inflation, actually. Because as a result of that, consumer demands will kind of drop enough to keep prices from rising. But it will happen if government, by its very actions, disrupt the normal functioning of the market. And that's what I think, what the direct link to the situation that we find ourselves. Because of government policies. So on the one hand, we see this unhealthy competition between expansionary policies and contractionary policies. So on the one hand, government has this huge fiscal imbalance that is trying to find a way out of, okay? And they're doing that by borrowing massively, okay? And then sometimes they print money as well, and some revelations recently manifest that, okay? So the printing of money causes disruption in the normal functioning of the market system. So on the one hand, again, you see the government trying to resuscitate, to build consumption using several development policies, especially if you've been observing the central bank in the past few years, what they've been doing with a lot of pro-poor policies. But then you also see that on the other hand, there is a limit constraint to supply. The embargo on trade, the border closure, and high taxes. So these are kind of conflicting signals. So the resultant effect is an economy that is not operating at its maximum productivity basis. So, of course, unemployment is a necessary consequence of all of that.
So, Doctor, if I take away from what you've said, does it mean that government's bad policies is the result, is the cause of the higher unemployment rate that we saw in the country?
Well, if you ask people who do business in Nigeria's economy, I overheard you speaking about Twitter opening up office in Ghana, and then you are asking why not Nigeria. I think Twitter kind of gives us a sort of a signal to what the investing public think about Nigeria's economy at this point in time. So let's consider exchange rates, for instance. So what we see is that we are, a very poor price discovery mechanism. That is what is used to determine the price or the value of the exchange rates. Okay. So it is not purely market determined. So when you have such kind of things, you have a lot of volatility and a lot of uncertainty. And that does not convey the right incentive to invest to the investing public. And what they do is that they vote with their feet. And that's exactly what has happened in our own situation. We have fallen off the foreign direct investment ladder, where we used to be the prime spot for FDI in Africa, but now we have fallen out of the league table. I don't even know where we are anymore. So countries like Ghana, Kenya, and so on have taken the spot that we used to occupy. So if any investor is thinking of coming to Africa, I don't think that Nigeria will be within their radar.
Doctor, do you think that the government, and when I say government, I mean government across board, not just about the central government. Do you think that governments across board have been asleep about the challenges that unemployment is in the country? Because just before this data came out, unemployment stood at around 27%. 27%, yes, I think so. Before it now skyrocketed to about 33%. That's in the pandemic year. Do you think that government has been largely asleep? Because for perhaps a responsive government in other climes, at least what I see, that if such data comes out, it will even take the president or like a minister of finance to like address the country and say, we've seen these numbers, they are ugly numbers, these are the things we are doing, perhaps wait for it to mature, and these are the things that we may do to alleviate the unemployment effect on the people. What do you think?
Yeah, but I'm not the first person to speak about it. If you listen to the pundits and spoken about Nigeria's government, and you said that it's falling to sleep. But I would say that I don't know if it is callousness or insensitivity on their part, but it looks like their priorities are different from that of the rest of us. So maybe it is not their priority to ensure that Nigerians have a better life. Because when you look at that unemployment figure, even when it's 27%, that's huge. Okay, that's very, very huge. So you have to look at the impact that will have on production. You were talking about consumption figures earlier. So if you break it down, so if you look at the components that make up the GDP, so consumption is one, investment is the other, and then you have government spending before you talk about the difference between our export and our import. So if you look at those four, the economy, the GDP that we keep talking about is driven by one, which is consumption. Now tell me an economy, an emerging economy that is geared to development that is driven by purely consumption. So this is just a consumer economy. There is no investment. So there is that huge investment gap with the 5-6 years. It's almost going to a decade now. It's not managed to bridge that investment gap. And then it is now beginning to, tell on the unemployment figure. So we have a largely unproductive economy. Okay? So being unproductive has a whole lot of negative connotations as well. And then the investing public, like Twitter, are drawing our attention to that.
I think, for me, that news yesterday from Twitter was very instructive. for the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, to have visited Nigeria in 2019. He visited Ghana, Ethiopia, and South Africa. And when they made the decision, it finally fell on Ghana, or they finally, put in their first Africa office in Ghana. And I must also say, for the after office, African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat is also in Ghana. So what is it that Ghana is doing and creating jobs for the people? Ghana that is, perhaps their population is just a little bit above Lagos now. What is Ghana doing and creating employment for its people that Nigeria isn't doing?
I don't think you need to stretch your brain too hard, because it only takes a listening to Ghana's president to know what they are doing right. Okay, he has this power to communicate, and then he sounds very credible, and he's very. You will know that he's competent and he's abreast of situation in his country. He seems to be a man who knows his honors and is able to deploy all the relevant resources to ensure that his country, plays the game. But just as it is happening in the domestic economy, I do not think that we are also maximizing our potential internationally. So gone are those days when we have very vibrant foreign sector that drove investment into Nigeria. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore, whether at the local government level or the state level or the federal level. So you see that there is kind of a disruption in the internal market dynamics here. So there is poor coordination. So like I was saying earlier, so we see that there is that divergence when it comes to priorities and the interests of the government and the interests of building the economy. So, and again, the high level of insecurity in Nigeria cannot give any investor any sort of confidence. So right now, no space is immune to insecurity in Nigeria, from regions to regions, even Lagos. NSAS protest, which was organized by the youth, you saw the impact. Perhaps the GDP would have grown above 0.1% that you alluded to earlier, more than that. But then the NSAS actually took a huge bite out of that, and then the momentum was lost. And then you do not blame the youth, because they are also protesting this high level of misery, unemployment, poverty, in the system. But then the government also, the approach that the government took, to arrest that situation is one that left much to be desired. So when you put all this together, why wouldn't Ghana, take the spotlight when it comes to attracting investments in Africa?
Doctor, if you take a look at the numbers, these unemployment numbers across board, the headline figure 33.3%, and you alluded earlier to some of the pro-poor policies that the Apex Authority, the CBN, came up or has come up with in the last few years. If you critically look at those numbers and perhaps the efforts by the central bank, do you think that the unemployment rate would have been worsened if we had not seen, for example, interventions from the Central Bank of Nigeria targeted for households and small businesses to fight COVID-19 impacts, interventions such as Anchor Borrowers Program, AAD, you have other programs, CACs, AXMEs, and all of that. If we did not have those programs, for example, from the Apex Authority, how much unemployment rate do you think we'll be having right now?
Well, I think I will approach that question from another dimension, because my opinion is that perhaps the economy would have performed better if we did proper sequencing. For instance, let me give you this. We have challenges at the ports, right? If you try to export out of Nigeria, you will know that life is actually very miserable. So our exporters are finding it difficult, to move their products either from the farm gate to the ports. All right. We spoke about, we know about the port congestion. We know about all the layers upon layers of hindrances and obstacles that a potential exporter would have to confront at the port system. Now, you haven't sorted all this out, and then you are giving money to someone to produce for export. Now, even when you have produced, how do you export the products? Okay. So let's look at it from that dimension. Sequencing is a big problem. right? So, in other words, it could actually be that some of those policies may have contributed to the situation that we're seeing. So I don't want to argue it from that perspective, but I will look at the numbers. So since we have tried to intervene in the risk sector when we have lower unemployment rates, and then after the intervention, unemployment has increased. So you do not need to ask me if unemployment would have gone worse if nothing had been done. I'm not sure that's a proper question or a proper way to put that question, but we will look at it from what has happened. So from following the positivist, pragmatic, position here. So which means government hasn't done well with those policies. Sequencing is a big one. What should have been done first? You know, when you want to take a bath, I don't think you dress, wear your tie, wear a dress, and then you start to pour water on yourself. No, you have to take a bath first, and then you begin to wear clothes, and then get ready to go to work or go anywhere. So not the other way around.
So,
but I think that seems to be
so
what
doctor, if I get you right, what you're saying is that the question would have been that we have some fundamental and structural defects which we should address. Because if you are
that's point blank.
Yes, if you're even giving money, it's like putting money in a basket, you would not, or putting water in the basket, you won't see the effect.
Definitely, that's you got it right. That's exactly what I'm saying. So sequencing is a very big problem. Now, when you look at where we are, okay, it's no different from the situation. I've said this in different fora also. In the 1980s, say 1983, 84, okay, when the international development agencies, IMF and the World Bank, okay, were projecting SAP, Structural Adjustment Program. So what were those conditions that brought about SAP? Again, huge fiscal imbalances, high level of inflation, high unemployment, okay? So what was SAP supposed to address? We see all those things at play right now. So we have been here before. So the question to ask, what happened for us to exit that situation? I would tell you that the economy of SAP actually continued until 1999, at the onset of democratic regime. And then the economy started to be liberalized and deregulated, you know, letting the market forces drive decisions, drive incentive in the system. And that's how, when we started seeing the economy opening, and then eventually we started seeing the GDP going to very high numbers, right? So for me, we need to go back to the basics, go back to the drawing boards and remove some, you know, the problem is that we have this dilemma. We are not sure we are a market economy or not a socialist system. So on the one hand, like I said in the beginning, we are running both expansionary and contractionary policies at the same time. You want to build the consumption capacity of individuals and households, but at the same time also you are constraining supply by your own policies. So when you have this, that's a recipe for disaster.
Doctor, let's take a look at some of the states, or at least we were able to profile some states with the highest unemployment figures. If we have that data, we can quickly put them on the screen as released by MBS just a few days ago. Unemployment seems to be very high, or the highest rather, in Imo State. After Imo, you have Adamawa, Cross River, Yobe, Akwa Ibom, Abia, Edo, Kaduna, Anambra, Borno, Rivers, FCT, Ebonyi, Kogi, and Niger State. Those are the top 15 states in Nigeria where you have highest unemployment rate. Doctor, please analyze for me those numbers, and what do you think, what significant things do you see around? Because for me, when I looked at these numbers, I had to pick out some states. For example, Imo, Cross River, Akwa Ibom, Abia, Edo, Anambra, Rivers, Ebonyi. These are states that are like southern states, and majority of the northern states were not even featured in the top 10. Doctor, what's your own assessment?
The reason why you see the unemployment figures going up is simply because of the collapse of the economy, the stagnant economy. Now, those states you mentioned are most of the states, especially in the south, okay, that do not, leverage, will I say, government-provided employment. For the other states where unemployment level is low, except Lagos, you will see that the government provides most of those jobs. Now, in those states, these other states, okay, In the past, those were, for instance, Anambra State. Anambra State is a state that is known for entrepreneurship, okay? It's self-driven, self-enterprise, and we know that very well. But because of the system, because of the economic meltdown, so that state has also gone into misery. So but for a state like Imo State, where I happen to come from, it's also the same kind of thing. So you've seen a state that was heavily reliant on public or government-generated employment. Okay, now that that it is not forthcoming, it's not coming to those states. Of course, I know that people have decried so much nepotism in the system in recent times with respect to government-created jobs. So when it comes to privately provided jobs, the economy is bad, and therefore those states that need to tap into that are badly hit, and that's why we see these numbers. But in the contrary, if we were to have an economy where the private sector, okay, grows the economy by creating the jobs, you will not see those kind of numbers. And I will keep saying this. As far as the government is taking, the public sector is taking the helms of job creation, we will continue to see this kind of numbers, regional, because the only thing that government has to pay for jobs it creates is the oil money. Now that has already dissipated, and we're not going to see very high oil prices any longer if you look at current trend. So what needs to be done? We have to empower, create the necessary conditions for private sector to drive job creation. That is the only way we can see those numbers go down. As long as we have this economy where we are not sure we are socialists or pro-market, then it will actually continue to get worse.
For Osun State that has the lowest unemployment rate, what do you think that Osun State is doing at 11.65%?
Well, we have to look at the size, the population in that state. Okay, that population is another thing that I haven't also mentioned. Okay, so we have this burgeoning population, especially youth population. It's going to keep growing. So if you look at Nigeria's population pyramid, what do you see? So you will see a pyramid that is narrow at the tip, but at the base, you know, it's very wide. So the average age in Nigeria is about 15 or 16 years.
18 years.
So that tells you 18 years. So some people will put it even lower. So that tells you that in the next 10, 20 years, so somebody who is 18 today, if you add 20, the person will still be a youth at 38, right? So in the next 2 decades, we are going to be having very high unemployment numbers, very high levels of poverty, except we declare a state of emergency with respect to job creation, okay? But those jobs cannot come if entrepreneurs, okay, businesses are not getting the right incentive from government to invest in the risk sector.
Doctor, since you talked about population and the young people, from that MBS report, I did read that 55.84 million Nigerians are within the country's labor force who did not go to school at all, and those who at most are having secondary school certificates as their highest educational attainment. This means that the proportion of Nigerians with senior SSC and below within the labor force is 80%. How serious is this? How problematic is this?
Of course, it's a big problem. So what he's telling you is that, okay, we have to look at let's decompose it, the skill set. So what sort of skill will you have with Nigerian secondary school education? So what sort of job will such a person be doing? So that is actually highlighting the REN, or, you know, the informal sector. So if those people have jobs, clearly those jobs will be in the informal setting, right? So it's not, even when you talk about labor-intensive production, that will not come because those people are largely unskilled. Unskilled in the sense that even for manufacturing, the risk sector jobs, they may not be that fit. You know, so we can compare that to China, for instance. Yes, people don't need high school that much. They don't need university education to really function in places where you have high demand for low-skilled laborers. So they can be in manufacturing, they can be in transportation, in other sectors that are growing. But in Nigeria, we've seen that both the farming communities have been decimated. Okay, we are not producing enough food because we don't have enough hands in the agriculture. So I actually do not know what those numbers, what they are doing, in terms of jobs. And then in manufacturing, the manufacturing sector has been in recession and continues to be in recession. Those states also, you pointed out there, if you look at production, except Anambra, you cannot tell what each state produces that is even distributed within the system. So we have that collapsed internal market conditions that we used to have in the past. And of course, part of that has been can be attributed to the impact of the COVID-19 lockdown, because remember, as of last year, what we're experiencing now was projected, right? That because of loss of opportunities in farming, the lockdown, the supply chain disruptions, eventually is beginning to play out now. So we hope that in the medium to long run, some of those effects will wear off, and then perhaps the economy will begin to recover. But not if government doesn't really declare a state of emergency in creating jobs for the teeming youthful population of this country.
So how worse or how better do you think that these numbers can be? At least in this year, since we are coming out of, or at least we're still in a pandemic, but at least the coast is a bit clearer with vaccine rollouts, with governments across the world easing and manufacturing taking place in some parts of the world. So how better, let me put it that way, how better do you think that the unemployment rate would look like in the next data analysis?
I think it will start to get low. I mean, it will reduce, but not significantly. Not significantly, because we are talking about the natural, things that will happen. Of course, logistic constraints are beginning to be lifted all over the world, and then oil price has started to build up. And then as that happens, government fiscal position will improve. Right, so I mean that will increase, demand for the system, payments, and all of that. So yes, it will reduce, but not significantly. What we are looking at long-term structural changes that will bring us lower, bring down the unemployment rate, so that we can begin to see the natural rate of unemployment play out in the economy. Okay, but that requires a lot of structural fixes, not short-term, not quick fixes. So we have to look at the economy the way it is, and again, start to build those linkages between the rural economy and the urban, between the local economy and the state and the federal system. As it is now, the internal market conditions, as I keep saying, is still in disruption. We have to fix that before we can get out of this quagmire.
If we take a look at America, for example, and I know America is far too big an example for us to give, but let me take a look at America with what President Biden is currently doing. The over $2 trillion infrastructure plan, which he has set out to put America on a different footing, infrastructure plan that would also create jobs. We've seen the $1.9 trillion he also put in place to save Americans from losing their jobs. Do you think that we should embark on such big plans for the country to save us, at least within now the next mid to long term?
When it comes to government-driven policies or initiatives, I think we've seen enough of that. If we are talking about infrastructure, recently the infrastructure, what do you call it?
Master plan.
Infrastructure fund, not master plan. The funding for infrastructure was launched, which is arrangement between the CBN,
Infraco,
African Finance, Infraco, infrastructure company. So that is something in that direction. And what I like about that is that it's going to be market driven. So it's not just government, corporate funding of projects. So that is going to be clearly driven by the market forces and prices. So to that extent, I think it's a step in the right direction. But when you're talking about all these sort of incentives or initiatives, that governments around the world are putting in place, we have to look at our own fiscal position. Is our government in position to do those things? And wouldn't their effort further worsen the situation as we have seen in the past? So I wouldn't even expect the government to do anything such as that. If anything needs to be done, let it be driven by the rational calculation of market forces. Yeah, I know some people will not like that. They would want the government to do that and do this. But we have seen that our government is clearly disincentivized when it comes to doing the right things. So perhaps this is a time for the government to take a backseat and allow the private sector, give them all the support required, reducing all those structural obstacles that we experience every day in the economy, so that the private sector can create jobs, okay, and then help us get out of this quagmire. And another thing I need to say is that given the insecurity that's gone, around the country, the corporate Nigeria hasn't made any statement. We have not heard from any sort of corporate organization regarding the state of insecurity. But then we know that peace and security is a precondition for development, for market functioning. If we don't have security, most company, FMCGs, I know that they've closed their shops. Everywhere we have insecurities in Nigeria. Whenever there is any unrest anywhere, there seem to be, there are also targets. We saw it with the NSAS, banks were burnt, ATMs were looted and all of that. So I think it's time for them. I know that they also banded together during the COVID-19. Yes, but this is also a time for them to come together to, help the government to address the insecurity that is beginning to, undermine everything in the country today.
I think you just raised a valid point, Doctor. And when you were talking about it, what also came to my mind is that Nigeria's private sector, is the Nigerian private sector afraid of the big government, so to speak, that perhaps if you speak against what is happening in the country, your company is targeted, so to speak. We're seeing what is happening right now. Alibaba in China, we see what is happening, so, but as we conclude the program today, you've said everything though, but if you take a look at the unemployment rates in Nigeria right now, 33%, we're behind two countries. I think Namibia and Bosnia and Herzegovina.
South Africa?
Yeah. Okay, in Africa, yes. I was even thinking about another country. How much do you think that the states' responsibility falls on the state as we finish? Because states can also work in partnership with private sector to be able to alleviate this problem. What should states do away from the central as a matter of urgency?
Actually, now that you're talking about the states, I think I forgot to put that in the context. States in Nigeria, most of the states run very irresponsible government, but you don't blame them again, because the system is such that, it's heavily centralized, okay? I don't know the ambit of freedom, but I think the states have, much degrees of freedom when it comes to creating jobs and attracting investment to their state, to their particular states. But I think I was speaking about that also the other day. When it comes to corporate tax, because there are some structural changes that we need to effect. Corporate taxes go to government, right? If I'm a state governor and I go out to the day, Twitter will pay corporate tax to the federal government. Do I have a very strong incentive? Am I incentivized enough to go out there and lobby investors to come to my state? So these are some of the structural changes that we need to fix if we need to empower the states. Okay. So yes, most governors actually are seeing their positions as that of emperors. Okay, and that is they don't see themselves as development champions. They do not seem to cater for the masses, for their interests, or for their livelihood. They don't see themselves from that point of view. They see themselves as people who work with the federal government, and you see that in every state. So all that they do is the biddings of the central government. It is because of the way it's structured. So everybody wants to be in the good book of the federal government. So they ignore what happens at the state. So each time, or most of the governors spend their days in Abuja, not in their states, not in their capitals. Okay, so that's a big problem in the system. They say we fix that, okay? Because when we talk about development, it has to be homegrown. It has to go from the local to the state. You didn't even talk about the local government that are now non-existent, okay, in terms of their impact. There were times when local governments were known to be doing roads, building infrastructure. But these days, the capacity of the local government to do that has been completely, removed. So I don't know why.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that, Doctor. Thank you for joining us today and bringing your own perspective.
Thank you, Nancy.
All right, I've been speaking with Dr. Bongo Adi, a senior lecturer at the Lagos Business School. That's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. Thank you all for joining us. Don't forget that the conversation still goes on our social media handles. Bye-bye.